that thou mightest, first I want you to notice in verse 4, that thou mightest know for certainty wherein thou hast been instructed. Standing before his old friend, Theophilus received the book which Luke wrote in order that Theophilus might know facts from fiction in the life of Jesus. We really do not know who Theophilus was. He could have been a real person. He could have been something of Luke's thinking. But more than likely he was a person who knew Luke and Luke knew him. It's most likely that he was a Christian. He most likely was of Roman descent, and that he had been saved, and he had heard some things about Christianity, and he must have received some instructions in the Christian faith. And Luke wrote this gospel and the book of Acts to tell the truth concerning the life and the ministry of Jesus Christ. Now, Matthew, Mark, and John wrote very close to the time of Christ. It is doubtful that Luke even knew Matthew, Mark, and John. It's probably 30 years or perhaps 40 years have passed since the last book perhaps was been written. And even by the time that Luke wrote this book, sometimes before 95 AD, many people were far removed from the ministry of Jesus, both geographically and in time. And Luke took the task to provide them with such an account of the story of Jesus that would enable them to see the story with which they had already become generally familiar with was indeed the truth. And what they thought they knew but had some questions about, he's going to share with them the reliability of what they had heard. Because what they knew was based upon their faith in God, in Christ, and in their salvation. Maybe, as do many believers, then and even now, as Theophilus had some troublesome questions about Christ and ministry of Jesus Christ while he was on earth. Maybe there was some questions about the birth of Jesus. Maybe they had some questions about, was Jesus indeed the Son of God? I mean, after all, his own people crucified him because he said he was God. Can you clear up for me, was Jesus on the cross, did he die in our stead? Was salvation provided for by Christ shedding his blood on Calvary's cross? Was he actually buried, and did he actually raise from the grave? And so these perhaps were interesting questions, and they wanted perhaps to have some assurance of the faithfulness of what they believed. And I would think that many would have some questions about the Christian faith. Was it really true and only the truth? If it was true about Jesus as God, why did so many reject him? And why did he die on the cross? And why did the Jews reject the message while the Gentiles received it? Did postmodernism start after the death of Christ? Did people post-Christ time bring into question all that Christ taught? Truth has had a hard time for 2,000 years. So let's break down these 4 verses in Luke. Notice it says, "for as much." It's the only time that word is used in this sense in the New Testament. It's the only time that Greek word, for as much, in the Greek. Since, admittedly, true, seeing that. It is an intensive participle to emphasize the important. This, what I'm about to say, is extremely important. As many. How many? No one knows. But obviously there's more than 2 or 3. And Luke uses the material of Jesus that was written by Mark and Matthew. Notice he says, have taken in hand. He has taken in hand. In other words, it's the only time it's used in the New Testament. It's a medical term which causes some to think that Luke was a doctor. Luke is not saying that the other writers didn't do well. Matthew, Mark, and John were written earlier than Luke, and Luke had secured perhaps fuller information, and he planned out to write a book on a larger scale. And he wrote Luke and Acts, and he put those 2 books together. He wrote more verses than the Apostle Paul, unless you put in Hebrews. And so he is writing a book to tell the whole story in Luke and in Acts. And with all that had been written, Matthew, Mark, and John, there still was room to write another book. Now, I know some of you say, why do we need another book about Jesus Christ? There are thousands of books written on Luke. There's commentaries on top of commentaries on Luke. Why do we need another book on Luke? As Frankie said earlier, why do we need another translation? We got plenty of them. To set forth in order, he said. To set forth in order. In other words, to draw up a narrative. The word set forth in order. That's a verb for arranging things in proper order again. Luke means to say that those before him had made an attempt to rehearse in orderly fashion various matters about Christ. You do understand that the Gospels is just narratives of this event and that event and this event and that event and this event. And they may have skipped 6 weeks, they may have skipped 1 month, they may have skipped six days, they may have skipped 1 year. They just kind of went from one narrative to another narrative. So the expression points to a connecting series of narratives in some order, topically or chronologically, rather than just isolated narratives. They had produced something more than mere notes. It means that he wanted to carry a thing through, especially in the book of Acts. He wanted to carry on the work of Christ. Christ's work had not been done when Luke finished, so Acts picks up where Christianity started in Luke. Notice it says a declaration of the things. It's the only time that word declaration is used in the New Testament. The word declaration, to lead the way, something which led the readers through the mass of facts and narratives. It is amazing that how you can accumulate volumes of paper on a subject. I noticed that what was the movie, Gone with the Wind? That originally it was meant for 7 hours. The book, when it became a teleplay, they said that the director said it's going to take 7 hours for the movie to be made. And of course, the director said there is no way possible that we can have a 7-hour movie. Back in 1939. You're going to have to condense it down to at least 3 hours. So, a lot of Christ's life was condensed from 3.5 years of ministry to just, of 30 years of life, just to 3.5 years of ministry, it was in small narratives. So what Luke is saying, I want to give a single narrative embracing the whole of the evangelical matter. Fully, thoroughly, properly, I want to give you a diagnosis of what is set out to be in detail. I want to recount and describe to you in more detail. And they tell us that the book of Luke is written in such detailed Greek that they know that he must have been a medical doctor with a medical degree, and he spoke in terms that none of the other three guys wrote. Notice he said, which are most surely believed among us, which have been fulfilled. Perfectly passive participle. When used of persons in the New Testament, it means to be convinced, fully persuaded. Notice with me Romans chapter 4. Romans chapter 4. It says that, he says that for which are most surely believed among us. Romans chapter 4 and verse 21. See if I can find it real quick. And been fully persuaded that what he had promised, he was able also to perform. So what Luke is saying, he said, I want to be able to help you to be fully persuaded that which Christ performed, he will be able to fulfill. And you can also see that in Romans 14:5, also in Hebrews chapter 6, verse 11, also chapter 10 and verse 22. Luke may be referring to matters connected with Christ's life, which have been brought to a close among us and to be accomplished. That you fully will have an understanding. Now notice that Matthew, Mark, and Luke comprises what are called the Synoptic Gospels, because they all tend to treat the life of Christ from a singular perspective. And each writer has a different perspective, talking to different people from different points of view. Now notice verse 2. Even as they delivered them unto us, which from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word. Even as, Luke says, Matthew, Mark, and John, accounts, narratives, had their basic sense, they delivered them unto us.